In episode 8, there are three...
No.
No.
No. Yeah, you're going to have to start it over.
How did I get started?
Welcome to Across the Sunring Seas. I'm Zach Hudspeth.
And I'm Nathan Dewberry. Over the next... Why is it so slow? Is that how you say that?
I don't even remember. If my boss is watching this, it's a joke.
Welcome to Across the Sunring Seas. I'm Zach Hudspeth.
And I'm Nathan Dewberry. Over the next several podcasts, we're going to break down The Rings of Power, Episode 8, Alloyed.
We're joined by the Education Secretary for the Tolkien Society, Will Sherwood. With the season being completed, we figured we could take a little longer to look into the episode and break it down over a few podcasts.
Alone, this is just a journey. Adventures, they must be shared. We're excited to be able to share this with you.
My name's Will Sherwood. On my 5th birthday, my mum and dad bought me a radio version of The Hobbit. We put it on and I was falling asleep. I was already quite tired. But we had the fire on, the TV was on as well, I think. But the fire was directly in front of me. And it was the one where Bilbo is kind of being interviewed almost by the narrator. I remember it just being such a great adaptation, like it really hooked me in. And it got to the moment where the dwarves are singing the Lonely Mountain verse, and Bilbo is looking into the fire and he feels the stir, like the Tookish genes are being stirred up. And I was also dozing and staring into the fire as well, so there was almost kind of like an intimate connection, and I did feel that. I felt quite empathetic towards Bilbo in that moment, and because we did a lot of journeys in the car, and I think I had like a tape player around the same time, it pretty much ended up going with me everywhere. So in a couple of weeks, I could recite most of the actual tapes. A few years later, obviously, the Jackson films come out. I had read The Hobbit. I had not read Lord of the Rings at that point, so Jackson was my introduction to the Lord of the Rings specifically. I did not read the books in between either, so it was very much a case of wanting to experience the story on the big screen and finding out what happened on the big screen. Obviously, the Ralph Bakshi was kind of being promoted when Fellowship of the Ring came out on VHS, classic VHS, loved the VHS. And so watched that, so kind of knew a bit about Two Towers and what was going to happen. So years went by, I constantly was trying to get Lord of the Rings somehow into my schoolwork, write stories from other characters' perspectives. And when it got to A-level English, I chose the Eärendil poem, the first quite significant poem that Tolkien wrote of his Legendarium, full of very strong rhyme, oxymorons, and internal rhyme as well. So the first essay that I wrote on it was quite significant, handed it in to my teacher, and she turned around and said, right, now you've got all of that out of your system, let's just focus on the actual English analysis that the examiner is going to understand. So there was way too much referencing to the Silmarillion and the wider stories of Middle-earth. So yeah, I had to take it from there and suddenly kind of reduce it down to here. Got to university and no one would support me doing a dissertation on Tolkien because no one knew Tolkien that much. So I started to go down the Romanticism route, which I really, really enjoyed, and was starting to kind of piece together my own kind of ideas on Tolkien and Romanticism. And over the next couple of years, just kind of, bought a few books, Verlin Flieger, Tom Shippey, and I just kind of be reading them in my own time. And then all of a sudden, kind of got this idea about Tolkien and the Romantic poet John Keats being quite similar in some ways. And I recalled talking or going to see Professor Nick Groom deliver a paper on Tolkien and Cornwall at a local literary festival in Foy in Cornwall, where I grew up. And he was fantastic. He was really, really engaging. And I knew about the Cornwall connection anyway, but I was like, oh, this is a professor from university. Like, this is amazing. And I always remembered this chap, Nick Groom. And I think I checked out his profile a couple of times on Exeter University. And it got to the stage, I was like, right, I've got an idea. I don't really want to do a taught course. This feels more like a research project. And so I reached out to him, and he was extremely supportive, and said, right, let's have a meeting, let's put together a proposal. And so I put together the proposal, and skip ahead a couple of years, and I submit a 40,000 word master's by research on Tolkien and Keats, which was really, really exciting. I had the chance to go and look at Tolkien's manuscripts at the Bodleian Library. I went up to King Edward School in Edinburgh and looked through the old, so the external people who come in to review a school and how the school is doing. So I read a couple of those reports. I found evidence in his undergraduate notebooks in the Bodleian that Dimitri Fimi and Nick Groom had speculated about, but there was no evidence. And here it was in one of his undergraduate notebooks, the actual evidence that he was aware of these two particular writers from the 18th century. And so that was quite significant. And I finished my MA, and during that process had been to the Tolkien Society seminar, Tolkien and the Pagan, and was introduced to a range of scholars, completely freaked out meeting those people as well. They were celebrity status to me, and they were extremely kind, extremely supportive. And we then had the Tolkien 2019 conference the following year, which I then attended. I presented some of my research there as well, which Christina Scull and Wayne Hammond were in the front row for. So that was a little bit intimidating, but they were also extremely supportive. And at that event, I was talking to a couple of members of the committee, and it turns out their education secretary was stepping down. Now, I had a career in education, and after my MA, I was going back to continue teaching. So I thought, sounds like the perfect opportunity to marry these two parts of my life together. And a few years on, I'm still the education secretary for the Tolkien Society. I've published part of my MA thesis as well in the Journal of Tolkien Research, and I'm currently editing the Romantic Spirit in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien with Julian Ealman as well, who is a fellow Romanticist and Tolkien fan. So which kind of brings me to this moment here. I just need to get the PhD started sooner rather than later.
What is your plan for your PhD? What are you thinking you're going to do?
So I'm going to look at how Tolkien builds on the romantic elements that are inherent within his work. So that's a bit of a strange way to say it. But how does he take romanticism and reinvent it for the 20th century? So next major step is the PhD on Tolkien and romanticism.
Years ago, they started talking about a TV show for Lord of the Rings. When did you first get rumblings of it, and what were your initial thoughts?
I don't even remember. It was so long ago. Uh, uh, oh, wait, no. I was definitely doing my MA. Yes, because I'd gone back to Cornwall. So the earliest that I definitely remember would have been late 2017 or early 2018. And so all we knew at the time was, there's going to be a TV show and it's going to be linked to Lord of the Rings. So myself and my supervisor, like if you do not know Professor Nick Groom's work, go read his work. It's incredible. Like there's a reason why I keep on talking about him. He's a phenomenal scholar. Um, but we were talking about, what could they do? And we were like, well, there's been a bit of speculation about Aragorn, like his story. So we were talking about how the in the appendices where you've got Aragorn and Arwen, as well. It's such beautiful writing that could genuinely be a story, and people really would get behind that. I mean, best of luck finding someone to replace Viggo Mortensen, but we really would get behind it um, as well. So I think I know a lot of people were uncertain as to is this a are they doing a series version of the book? So are they going to retell the actual book itself? At no point, I don't remember at any point thinking that was the plan. I could understand how people got a bit confused. Um, and maybe it wasn't the best idea for Amazon to be like, "Oh, we're going to do Lord of the Rings," because obviously everyone would be like, "What?" this work that some people hold Jackson's adaptation as like the greatest adaptation ever. They compare like Jackson's adaptation to how many Oscars it won to Harry Potter compared to God knows how many Marvel films. Lord of the Rings still has the most Oscars, um, and some people just naturally don't like Jackson's adaptations. Um, but the idea of rewriting Jackson, within 20 years after Lord of the Rings came out, you know, heresy it would be to some people. And I can understand why some people might think that. But personally, no, I just was like, I get to go back to Middle Earth. If they're doing it in New Zealand, that is just going to be special. Because for me, that was the first thing I ever saw of Middle Earth. Beforehand, it was always in my mind because it was a radio adaptation to me. And then I kept forgetting about it because we just didn't get any news for ages. And then obviously the big picture of um, the two trees and who we now know to be Finrod was released, um, and then I completely forgot about it again. uh, so yeah, kind of like a little bit like a Mexican wave in my reactions to it.
You also are big into music. Can we lay a foundation for that so that when we can jump into it as we discuss this episode?
Music's always kind of been part of my childhood and growing up. My grandparents are kind of a bit more into the classical sphere, um, which is fine. It's what they like, and my parents are a bit more diverse in their range. And my mum used to play the piano when she was younger for one of her birthdays. my grandparents bought her a piano, um, and I just kind of hopped on and started to write my own music. Um, and I think it got to the stage where my parents were just like, right, just do you want to have lessons? So I ended up uh, taking piano lessons, and it just kind of like spiraled from there. Um, like university, I focused on the English, but I was still doing like orchestra and choir and other bits and bobs. And it's, I think as well, kind of like Howard Shaw's scores to the Lord of the Rings were a real turning point, um, because I'd never. Sometimes you hear like Mozart and Beethoven, and almost like you just switch off to it straight away. Like, no, no, not going to listen to it. Um, whereas that, I don't know what it was, but I was just more willing to listen to Howard Shaw, um, and that was my gateway into orchestral and choir music. And I can never look back since. That really was a pivot point. Um, so much so that listening to Bear McCreary's music for the Rings of Power, it's it's really brought back memories of listening to Howard Shaw's music for the first time, and it's almost kind of like a rediscovery. Um, that is how brilliant Bear has been with the score. That is how good his music for the Rings of Power has been.
You were telling me that each episode got its own full score.
So initially, Bear released a 2.5 hour score, which had all of the themes on there. Most of the themes got there. Like, technically all of them, but he didn't name them all. Cheeky. Um, they all got their own suite. Uh, so like 3 to 4 minutes, some a little bit longer, where you just hear that theme. Um, and that's about 40, 50 minutes, maybe an hour or something. It's quite a substantial amount of music. And then the rest of it is um, cues from the series itself. So, like the boat, for example, like when Galadriel's on the boat and the grey rain curtain folds back and she decides to leave, that entire cue is on there. Uh, the Battle for the Southlands is cut up into different cues and they're different tracks. So that is the 2.5 hour, just kind of a casual listening experience. Kind of like you've got the whole of season one, everything you kind of want in that 1, 2.5 hours. It's recently been updated with Fiona Apple's um, vocal rendition of Where the Shadows Lie as well. I'd really recommend people have a listen. It's got a real resonance and depth to it. So I've enjoyed having that new aspect to it. And then on top of that, with each episode, Bear initially released only on Amazon Music. Uh, the almost, I think literally there's about 99% of the music on there. The music for each episode. So you'd have like 40, 50 minutes um, of music released per week. However, and and I have done this, so it is now all 8 albums are now on Spotify as well. So if you put his 2.5 hour album and all 8 uh, individual episode scores together, you would end up with 9 hours and 43 minutes at 109 songs, which I am really going to look forward to listening to.
What is the importance of music? Why do they put this stuff into the scripts, and why do they put so much into it, the effort?
That's a really good question, and it's so I teach music and English, and with my year nine students, we have a unit that specifically looks at film music, and I open up with a video that answers this exact question: like, what is the point of music in film or TV? Why does it need to be there, or what does it necessarily need to be there? So it opens up a lot of questions, but we do a scenario where we take the opening scene from Lion King, so ridiculously famous um, scene. We all know the rising sun suddenly bringing light into the world, new life, birth, symbolism, X, Y, Z, and that voice is so powerful, so penetrating. Um, what if you replaced that with a funeral march? What suddenly happens? Because those colors, yes, they're powerful and they can be symbolic of royalty and strength, but the the very rich reds, the blacks, the um, could also be symbolic of death as well. So music has the ability to completely and radically change the meaning of what you're watching, and it works. Um, it's basically your navigator. That is literally it. It is your navigator to understand what is going on. If there is if there's sad music playing, then that is telling you how you should be feeling, or it's telling you what a character is feeling as well. So it's even the smallest of moments can, if you're listening, can tell you something about the character. And I think there's a really good moment where Bear, for um, the insider um, documentaries on each episode, we got to, oh, what episode was it? It wasn't Udun. It was the next one, the aftermath of Odrun erupting, and Elendil is watching all the Numenoreans come up the hill, and he sees Beric. It's like, right, Isildur must be there. So he's obviously been looking for his son. Then it's not Isildur. So the dum dum da dum, when it does bum 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 bum, when it lands on that fourth note, the chord um, that Bear used had to reflect how Elendil was feeling, and he was, in the interview as well, he says how he was like his eyes were streaming because the composer can get so immersed into the character, um, and into the feeling of the of what they are trying to score, because ultimately it's a it's a job where you must be able to empathize with the characters, because you've got to create music that kind of tells us what they're thinking and what they're feeling.
We have gotten 7 episodes of The Rings of Power, and then episode 8 drops. I was expecting a 2-hour episode. I felt like it needed time to wrap up. What were your thoughts leading up to episode 8?
I get up at 6 or just before 6 o'clock to watch it every Friday. And my teaching load is not that much on a Friday either. So I'm like, I can get away with this and, hypothetically nap in the afternoon uh, because I haven't got classes. If my boss is watching this, it's a joke. Um, so I thought it would be epic if it was really long, kind of like Stranger Things season 4, part 2, which was like, a 2 hour and then an hour and a half, kind of like the length of Lord of the Rings, like one of the Lord of the Rings films, over 2 episodes. So yeah, that would be awesome, and I don't mind. slow pace at all. I mean, you watch Fellowship of the Ring. Like, I know people who hate Fellowship of the Ring because they say it's so slow. And I think that's a really useful reminder. If anyone says the pace is slow, it's like, have you watched Jackson's adaptations? Have you read Fellowship of the Ring? Like, it takes them, what, like 300 pages, 250 pages just to get to Rivendell. I think it's 50 pages between Weathertop and Rivendell. It's like, oh no, we've got to go over that hill. You know what? I made a mistake. We've got to go back. Oh, we can't get over the river. We're going to have to go a few miles south. Oh yeah, Frodo's also sick. So pace, not an issue. I was quite happy that it was just about the same length as the other episodes. Sometimes if they do, I mean, especially those last two episodes of Stranger Things, way too long, way too long. If it's narrative driven, great. If it's character driven, great. But if you're just waffling and throwing things in for the sake of it, then just get out the writing room. So I genuinely thought, okay, hour and 12 minutes. I think that's roughly what it said on Amazon. When I saw it, I was like, yeah, okay, standard episode. It's no different from the others. And I think that's the point I'm trying to get at, is it didn't feel any different. It wasn't hyped up or anything like that. Yes, it's the end, it's the conclusion, but it's just like the other episodes. And yeah, I appreciated that.
I saw 3 storylines here. We had the Numenorian storyline, we had the Stranger storyline, and we had Galadriel and Halbrand in Eregion. Is that how you say that?
Eregion, yeah. I think that's right.
So I have a problem with names, by the way. I always say the names wrong. So when I go ahead and say it right, I don't actually know that I'm saying it right.
Well, do remember, Tolkien himself sometimes couldn't actually decide which way to say certain names.
There you go. So
there we go.
You're good. You're good.
Well, great.
In episode 8, there are 3 storylines: the Numenorians, the Stranger and Harfoots, and Galadriel and Halbrand in Eregion.
We will split the 3 storylines into 3 podcasts, and Will Sherwood will help us lead the adventure.
So join us next time as we venture across the Sundering Seas. We do not say goodbye, we say
Namarie.